Some things in nature happen so quietly, so delicately, that you could watch for hours and never see them change, until suddenly they are complete. Snow is like this. It doesn't crash into the world. It doesn't arrive with noise. It begins as a secret, a whisper of vapor in the cold air, invisible at first, hesitant in its form. And then, slowly, almost shyly, it grows. Every snowflake that has ever fallen began its life as something impossibly small, a speck of dust, a grain of pollen, a microscopic fragment suspended high above the earth. Around this quiet center, water molecules gather. One by one, they arrange themselves into a precise geometry nature has been writing for billions of years. Sixfold symmetry. Perfect, and yet never the same twice. The world rushes. The world hurries. But snow teaches. A different rhythm. Tonight, we will slow ourselves to match it. We will follow a single snowflake from its first breath of existence in the high winter clouds, all the way to its gentle landing in the sleeping world below, and perhaps, in its unhurried crystallization, we will hear the quiet truth our own. Lives have been whispering to us all along. Before we begin, take a deep breath, in through your nose, and slowly out. This will be a journey in slowness, in patience, in noticing the details you might have overlooked. If you find comfort here tonight, I invite you to subscribe, not for numbers, but because there is a kind of peace we all deserve to sleep to. Share this with someone who could use a little stillness. And, if you wish, tell me in the comments. What was the last time you truly noticed something grow? This is not a lecture. It is not a list of facts. It is a slow unfolding, like the snowflake itself. So let's begin, and let the science carry you gently toward sleep. This is the slow crystallization of snowflakes. Chapter 1. The first breath of ice. You are high above the earth. Higher than the mountains. Higher than the tallest cloud towers of summer. The air is thin here, so thin it hardly feels like air at all, more like a quiet veil stretched between you and the stars. The world below is hidden beneath a wide, pale blanket of cloud, and above you, the night is so clear that the constellations seem close enough to brush with your fingertips. Up here, in this cold cathedral of the sky, temperatures fall far below freezing. The molecules of water vapor float restlessly, invisible and weightless, moving in patterns older than memory. They drift apart and come together, collide and separate again, like dancers who never tire, endlessly changing partners in the silence of the upper atmosphere, and then something happens. Not loudly, not suddenly, but with a kind of inevitable grace. A speck appears. You wouldn't see it if you were not already looking. It might be a grain of dust carried on the wind from a faraway desert, or the pollen of a pine tree released in some distant forest months ago, or even a fragment of volcanic ash from the breath of the earth itself. It is small enough to pass unnoticed through all the layers of sky, light enough to float where it pleases. Yet it will become the heart of something exquisite. Water vapor drifts close. Molecule by molecule, the vapor encounters the speck and clings to it. The first to arrive hold fast, locking into place as ice. In that moment, the speck changes its role forever, no longer just dust, but the seed of a snowflake. The process is called nucleation. It is one of the quiet miracles of physics, the point at which the intangible becomes tangible, when scattered molecules begin to organize themselves into something with shape and purpose. But up here, there is no announcement, no fanfare. The transformation is as gentle as a sigh. A single water molecule, HO, is a marvel in itself. 2 hydrogen atoms and 1 oxygen atom, held together by covalent bonds, forming a bent shape that gives it polarity, a positive side and a negative side, like a tiny magnet. This polarity is what allows water molecules to link together. And in freezing temperatures, their dance changes. They slow. They lock hands with neighbors. They arrange themselves into a lattice, a repeating geometric pattern, each one perfectly angled to create six-fold symmetry. The first few molecules form a hexagonal plate. That shape is not chosen by chance. It is written in the very laws of chemistry, in the angle between the hydrogen atoms and the oxygen atom. Every snowflake that has ever existed begins here. With this same invisible hexagon, time passes differently in the upper sky. If you could watch this snow seed with your own eyes, it might seem as if nothing happens for a long while. The air around it is dry in places, saturated in others, and the water molecules must wander before they find their way to the forming crystal. Some arrive quickly and lock into place. Others slip away before freezing, carried off by a passing current of air, but slowly, inevitably, the crystal grows. From the flat hexagonal plate, tiny ridges begin to emerge from each corner. These are the beginnings of arms, the first delicate branches of the snowflake. Each arm grows outward, molecule by molecule, in perfect harmony with the others. Whatever one arm experiences, a subtle shift in temperature, a slight change in humidity, is mirrored in all six, so that the snowflake remains symmetrical. T is here, in these first breaths of ice, that the snowflake's uniqueness is already written. The exact pattern of humidity, temperature, and movement in this patch of air will never be repeated in the history of the world. This is why no two snowflakes are ever truly alike. The conditions that shape one will never shape another in exactly the same way. Far below, the world is unaware. A fox pads softly across the crusted snow of a frozen field. A river runs under a skin of ice, whispering secrets to itself. Somewhere, in the shelter of a house, a kettle hums before boiling. All of these lives and moments continue, untouched by the birth happening in the high, cold air, but up here, you and the snowflake are alone. It grows slowly, delicately, as though aware of the stillness it inhabits. It does not rush. It does not worry about reaching the ground. Its only task is to become what it is meant to be. The science of its formation is both precise and poetic. At temperatures just below freezing, snowflakes tend to form flat, simple plates. As the air grows colder, between about -10 degrees Celsius and -20 degrees Celsius, the crystals form more complex, branching structures. This snowflake begins its life in a zone of exquisite cold, somewhere around -15 degrees Celsius, a sweet spot for the feathery arms that will one day make it breathtaking. The arms lengthen. Their tips grow faster than their middles, creating elegant, tapering shapes. Microscopic ridges and grooves appear along the surface of the arms, catching stray molecules from the air. These patterns will remain for as long as the snowflake survives, even after it lands. Tiny signatures of the journey it took through the sky. Imagine if you could hear it. Not with your ears, but with some deeper sense, tuned to the quietest frequencies of the world. You might hear a soft, crystalline hum, the sound of structure taking shape, of order emerging from chaos. The snowflake drifts slightly, caught in a lazy spiral by a passing current of air. The movement does not disturb its symmetry. If anything, it allows the arms to meet new pockets of moisture, to grow more quickly. This dance between stillness and movement is part of the snowflake's beauty. It grows in response to every subtle change in its environment. Molecule by molecule, the pattern becomes more intricate. What began as a bare hexagonal plate is now a delicate star, its arms reaching outward in perfect balance. Each branch is a mirror of the others, yet not identical, a reminder that symmetry in nature is always touched by individuality. Here in the upper sky, the light is soft. Sunlight filters through the high clouds, scattering into pale blues and silvers. The snowflake catches it in miniature flashes, though no one is here to see. This is beauty for its own sake, beauty without witness, created simply because the laws of nature allow it. You watch as the snowflake continues its patient work. It is in no hurry to fall. Gravity is gentle here, its pull slowed by the thinness of the air. The snowflake remains suspended in its invisible cradle, growing, refining, becoming, and as you drift alongside it, a thought forms quietly in your mind. Perhaps this is how all true creation happens. Not in sudden leaps, not in loud declarations, but in the slow gathering of what is needed, the patient arrangement of each small part until the whole is ready to exist. Down below, the human world is full of urgency, clocks ticking, deadlines looming, voices calling. But here, in the birth chamber of a snowflake, there is only the steady rhythm of molecules finding their place. No one rushes them. No one tells them they are behind schedule. They grow at the speed of winter's breath, and maybe, just maybe, there is a lesson in that. The snowflake turns slowly in the thin air, each arm now delicate and lace-like, branching into smaller and smaller filaments. Under a microscope, it would look impossibly intricate, a frozen mandala drawn by the invisible hand of the atmosphere. The science tells us that its pattern is a map of its journey so far. The width of its arms, the sharpness of its points, the clarity of its ice, all are records of the exact path it has taken through the sky. In a way, it carries its own biography in its shape. And soon, that biography will lengthen as it begins the slow descent toward the earth. But for now, it simply exists in this stillness, a tiny work of art held aloft by the invisible architecture of the winter sky. And you are here to see it. In this rare moment before its journey changes, the first breath of ice is complete, and the snowflake, in all its silent perfection, is ready to fall. Chapter 2: Geometry in the Clouds. The snowflake is no longer only a seed. It has arms now, 6 delicate spokes reaching outward in all directions, as if stretching in the thin winter air. And here, in the quiet belly of the cloud, the air is full of possibility. Vapor drifts like a fine mist, invisible yet abundant, ready to join in the shaping. The cloud itself is not a uniform thing. It is a living, shifting tapestry, layers of moisture, pockets of warmth and cold, currents that twist and turn like the gentle eddies of a slow river. Within this pale, weightless world, the snowflake hangs suspended, caught between the pull of gravity and the lift of the air. Every drift, every shift in its surroundings, will write a new line in its geometry. Snowflakes follow a rule so precise it feels like magic. Every arm, no matter how far it grows, no matter what obstacles the snowflake meets, remains identical to the others. If one branch develops a tiny notch along its edge, all 6 will mirror it. If a tip splits into 2, the same will happen. To every tip. This is not because the arms communicate with one another in the way we think of communication. They simply share the same conditions, moment by moment. What one arm experiences, all experience. This is why the snowflake symmetry is so perfect, and yet so unique. The pattern is a reflection of the cloud's personality in the exact minutes and seconds of its formation. The temperature, the humidity, the movement of air, all sculpting in harmony. Up close, impossibly close, the snowflake is a map of repeating hexagons. 6 sides, always 6, because the very bonds of the water molecules demand it. In liquid water, molecules slip and slide past one another, free to take any shape. But in ice, they must lock into a lattice, a grid of bonds where each oxygen atom reaches toward 4 neighbors, forming a crystalline network. The natural angle of these bonds, about 120 degrees, builds the 6-fold shape again and again. Nature loves repetition. It is efficient. It is stable. And in the stillness of the cloud, efficiency becomes beauty. Around the snowflake, the cloud glows softly with diffused light. Sunlight above is scattered by countless droplets and crystals, turning harsh brightness into a gentle whiteness that feels like the visual equivalent of a whisper. You can almost hear it, the hush of light in a place where sharp shadows do not exist. The snowflake drifts forward, its slow rotation giving you a glimpse of each arm in turn. The tips are growing faster than the centers, their edges fanning outward into fern-like structures. These tiny branches, called dendrites, catch more vapor than flat surfaces, accelerating their own growth. They are fractal in nature, patterns that repeat on smaller and smaller scales, just as rivers branch into tributaries, and trees into twigs, and here, the science and the poetry intertwine. A snowflake is a frozen fractal, carrying the same mathematical elegance that shapes coastlines. Lightning bolts, and the veins in a leaf in the cloud shifting layers. The snowflake moves into a pocket of slightly higher humidity. Here, water vapor is abundant, and the crystal responds instantly, growing more elaborate. Each branch thickens, ridges forming along its length, grooves tracing delicate lines toward the tip. You might think of this as carving, but it is the opposite. The sculpture is being built from the outside in. The snowflake is not being chipped away at. Instead, it is gathering, collecting, adding. Every molecule that joins the crystal strengthens its structure, locking into the hexagonal grid and reinforcing the symmetry. The air around it is colder. Now, perhaps near -15 degrees Celsius still, the temperature most famous for producing the lacy, fern-like dendrites that people imagine when they think of snowflakes. If the air were warmer, closer to -5 degrees Celsius, the snowflake might be forming into a simpler plate or a slender column. But here, in this perfect chill, the arms keep their feathery grace. There is no rush in this place. Outside the cloud, far below, people move quickly. Buses rumble through slush-covered streets, boots crunch over ice, chimneys breathe plumes into the evening air. But in here, time feels stretched thin. Seconds pass like minutes. The snowflakes. Slow turning is almost imperceptible, as if it is in no hurry to become whole, and yet, even at this pace, change is constant. New molecular layers stack themselves like pages in a book. Some stack evenly, others form terraces, tiny steps leading outward, making the arms more textured, more able to catch stray vapor. These variations happen because of something called kinetic growth instability, a phenomenon where edges and points grow faster than flat surfaces, simply because they encounter more vapor. In human terms, you might say that the places of greatest openness, the tips reaching outward, receive the most connection, the most growth. The snowflake drifts again into a cooler layer of the cloud. The temperature here is closer to -20 degrees Celsius, and the change is subtle but profound. Now, the branches narrow slightly, elongating, their tips curling into finer points. Tiny side branches, or sectored plates, begin to form along the arms, adding yet another layer of intricacy. If you could magnify this moment to the scale of cities, the snowflake would resemble a vast, crystalline metropolis, main avenues stretching outward, lined with side streets, each one ending in its own delicate cul-de-sac. And just as a city's layout tells the story of its history, each ridge and branch tells the history of the cloud's breath in these minutes of formation. There is another current now, a slow, spiraling draft that carries the snowflake gently upward. It is strange to think of it moving against gravity, but in the world of clouds, air can rise as easily as it falls, especially when warmed from below by the earth or cooled unevenly by the surrounding atmosphere. This lift brings the snowflake back into a slightly warmer region, near -12 degrees Celsius. Here, the growth changes again. The tips broaden, the side branches thicken, giving the crystal a more star-like appearance. The snowflake is endlessly responsive, shifting its style of growth to match the exact environment around it. This is why, even though all snowflakes share the same basic hexagonal symmetry, their final shapes are so different. Each one is an autobiography written in ice, a record of every breath of air has passed through. The beauty of the snowflake's geometry lies not only in its form, but in its inevitability. Nothing here is random. The exact angles, the mirrored arms, they branching, all are dictated by the physics of water and the geometry of hydrogen bonds. And yet, within these unbreakable rules, Infinite variety blooms tea is a reminder that freedom does not always come from having no boundaries. Sometimes, the most beautiful creations arise within the limits of unchanging laws around the snowflake. Other crystals are forming too. Some are small, only just beginning to grow their first arms. Others are larger, their branches already long and sweeping. They pass one another silently, each on its own path, shaped by its own sequence of layers. And currents. Occasionally, two will brush against each other, merging into a twin form. Though such unions are rare and fleeting, you watch the snowflake you have followed since its birth. Its arms are now finely feathered, each side branch splitting into even smaller spines. The level of detail is beyond imagining, tens of thousands of molecular layers stacked in perfect alignment. The air is changing again. The cloud is moving, carried by the larger winds of the atmosphere. Somewhere ahead, a shift awaits, a downward draft, the beginning of the snowflake's descent toward the world below. But for now, it remains in the workshop of the clouds. Where geometry is still in progress if you close your eyes, you can picture it without seeing. The 6 arms spreading outward, the spaces between them filled with air, the entire crystal turning slowly as it gathers the last of its form. You can almost feel the coolness radiating from it, a faint echo of the cold that shaped it. The geometry is nearly complete. The snowflake has become the pattern it was always meant to be, the combination of order and individuality that makes every crystal unique. And in a moment, it will leave this quiet chamber of the sky and begin the long, gentle fall to the earth. But for now, it lingers, a perfect, fleeting piece of winter's design, held in place by the invisible hands of the clouds. Chapter 3. The Dance of Air and Silence. The moment comes quietly. One heartbeat. The snowflake is suspended in the patient stillness of the cloud's embrace. The next, it feels the slow persuasion of gravity, tugging it downward. The geometry is set now, 6 arms, each feathered and glistening, etched in the pure mathematics of ice. It is ready to move, though ready is a word the snowflake would never use. It simply follows what the air asks of it. The first drift is almost imperceptible. A soft slide through the cloud's haze, the light around it shifting from pure white to a dimmer, more silver glow. Molecules of vapor still brush against its edges, adding their final touches as the snowflake begins its descent. But the pace changes. The calm hovering gives way to motion. The air is not still. Even here, above the reach of trees and rooftops, the atmosphere is alive with invisible currents. Tiny shifts in temperature cause columns of air to rise or fall. Winds sweep through at varying speeds, some narrow and twisting, others broad and steady. And the snowflake, so light it could rest on a whisper, responds to every motion that it tilts, rotates, then rights itself again. Its fall is not straight, but a slow meander, a wanderer on an invisible path. One moment it drifts left, the next it glides right. Sometimes it rises again, caught in a gentle updraft, as though the air cannot yet bear to let it go. This movement is not random chaos. It is the result of delicate balances between the pull of gravity, the buoyancy of air, and the snowflake's own surface catching the wind like a tiny sail. Each of its arms adds resistance, slowing its fall, making it dance rather than drop. In meteorology, this interplay is called terminal velocity, the speed at which the force of gravity is perfectly countered by the drag of the air. For most snowflakes, that speed is just over 1 meter per second, slow enough that, if you stood beneath it, you could almost count the seconds until it reached your open palm. But here, where the air is still thin and cold, the snowflake moves even more gently. Around it, other snowflakes are falling too. Some spiral downward like tiny galaxies, their arms catching light in brief flashes. Others tumble end over end, their symmetry disrupted by collisions or uneven growth. A few drift so close you could imagine reaching out to cup them in your hands, though they would vanish into vapor at your touch. The snowflake you follow is not in a hurry. It lets itself be carried, lifted, lowered, turned. In this unplanned motion, something beautiful happens. Every shift in orientation exposes new facets to the moisture still lingering in the air, and even now, its form continues to refine. Minute ridges sharpen, tips elongate, edges frost, into finer lace. It is proof that a journey shapes the traveler long after they think they've been made. The silence here is immense. No rustle of leaves, no murmur of water, no hum of human life. Just the faint, almost imagined sound of air, moving past ice. If you could listen closely enough, you might hear the whisper of water molecules joining the crystal, a sound so quiet it would be lost in the stillest winter night, and yet there is music here, though it is not made of notes. It is the rhythm of motion and pause, of drifting and catching, of circling patterns traced without ever being seen. The snowflakes dance is not for an audience. It is the way of all things light enough to be moved by the air enters a pocket of warmer air, only by a few degrees, perhaps -10 degrees Celsius. The effect is immediate. The vapor here is less willing to freeze, and instead of elaborate dendrites, the edges of the snowflake begin to grow more slowly, smoothing into plates. For a moment, its arms look almost as though they've been brushed by a soft cloth, the sharp lace blurring slightly, but this is temporary. Just ahead lies another pocket of colder, moister air. The snowflake drifts into it like a dancer stepping onto a new floor, and at once the intricate growth resumes. Tips sharpen, branches divide again. The change is like music picking up after a pause, the same melody, but richer for the rest. From below, light begins to change. It is still daylight, but the clouds are denser here, and the sun's glow is filtered into cooler shades. The snowflake reflects it in fleeting sparks, silver and pale blue. If you were to hold it under a microscope at this moment, you would see the interplay of light and shadow across its crystal plains, miniature landscapes of ridges, valleys, and cliffs no wider than a hair's breadth. The air current shifts again. This time, it pushes the snowflake sideways for a long stretch, carrying it across a horizontal layer of the cloud. This sideways drift is not wasted. It gives the snowflake time to gather more moisture before the final descent. Snow scientists, snow crystallographers, know that this part of the journey is critical. The longer a snowflake can linger in moist, cold air, the more elaborate it becomes. A quick drop through dry air results in simpler, less ornate forms. But here, the snowflake is blessed with patience. The air cradles it, lets it wander, gravity calls again. The snowflake begins to sink toward the base of the cloud, where the brightness fades to a dim, grey-white. The air here is denser. The fall becomes steadier. But even now, the dance does not stop. Small eddies tilt it, turn it, slow it, and set it spinning gently before righting it again. It is not a fall to fear. There is no impact waiting, no sudden end. The ground is still far below, hidden from view. The snowflake moves as though it knows it will arrive when it is meant to, and that the path there is as much a part of its life as the destination. You drift with it, feeling the subtle shifts of the air. Warm pockets brush past like soft hands. Cooler currents lift from below, momentarily suspending the fall. In each moment, the snowflake symmetry is tested and reaffirmed. Every molecule remains in perfect alignment with the whole, no matter how the air tosses it. This is one of nature's quiet truths. Balance is not the absence of motion, but the ability to remain whole within it. The cloud begins to thin. Pale light spills in, and for the first time since its birth, the snowflake glimpses the world below, not in sharp detail, but in muted shapes and colors. A dark smudge that might be a forest. A silver curve that could be a frozen river. Everything, softened by distance, as if painted with the lightest brush. Between here and the ground lies open air, colder, drier, and less forgiving. The snowflake's dance will change as it enters it. In the thinner moisture, it will no longer grow, but begin the long preservation of its final form. For now, though, it remains in the cloud's embrace, letting the air guide it in slow arcs and spirals. Around it, other snowflakes join the descent, some close enough that their paths nearly touch before parting again. They are companions for moments, then strangers once more. The snowflake tilts again, this time in a long, graceful turn that shows each arm to the light. Its geometry, perfect, unique, unrepeatable, is fully visible now. You can see the symmetry that began as a single hexagon, the complexity born from countless invisible choices of air and vapor. This is the dance of air and silence. Not choreographed, yet precise. Not still, yet peaceful. It is movement shaped by the invisible, the kind of motion that leaves no mark and yet changes everything it touches. And in this moment, drifting downward with infinite slowness, the snowflake is both a part of the air and apart from it, a perfect passenger in winter's quiet breath. Next will come the crossing into the open sky, the meeting of wind and light, the first glimpse of earth in true clarity. But that is for another chapter. For now, the snowflake drifts still within the cloud's embrace, letting the unseen currents carry it, unhurried, toward whatever comes next. Chapter 4. The Descent Through the Quiet World. The sky had long since surrendered its last colors. What remained was not quite darkness, not quite light, an in-between shade that seemed to hold its breath. Somewhere above, the upper layers of air still hummed faintly from the sunlight they had stored through the day. But here, as we began our descent, everything was slowing, cooling, falling inward. It is a strange thing, to move downward into stillness. The higher atmosphere, for all its thinness, is restless. Winds curl and twist like restless dancers, clouds bloom and dissolve without warning. But as you sink, layer by layer, into the denser world below, the chaos begins to subside. Not because there is no motion, there is always motion, but because the motion has weight now, and weight makes movement deliberate. We left the silvered lattices of the high cirrus far above, where ice crystals spun in slow pirouettes, flashing in the low light. Now the air was thicker, warmer, yet quieter, as if the density itself pressed sound into submission. Even the wind, which once sang against the hull in a bright, cutting voice, now spoke in muffled tones, as if swaddled in wool. And as we descended, the shapes of the world began to re-emerge. The layer of shadows from above, the earth had been a vague wash of blues and greys, blurred by distance and the soft scattering of light. Now, shadow had shape. I could see ridges, the contours of mountains outlined not by sunlight but by the absence of it, black teeth rising from a pale horizon. Valleys yawned open between them, spilling darkness like ink. There is a particular silence that comes with shadow. It is not the silence of nothingness, but the silence of things holding still. In science, we speak of thermal equilibrium, that point when temperatures begin to even out, when heat ceases to leap violently from one body to another. Here, descending into the shadowed valleys, I could almost feel the landscape settling into its own equilibrium, waiting for the long hours of night. It made me think of how our own bodies do the same. When the sun leaves us, we too begin a quiet descent, the body cooling by degrees, the mind dimming its chatter. The quiet of the land mirrors the quiet of the self. The whisper of density every 100 meters downward, the air thickened, not in a way that the lungs could sense yet, but in the way sound moved. A stray gust brushed past us, and instead of the crisp hiss I'd heard above, it rolled into a low, rounded sigh. The molecules here were closer together, their collisions more frequent, and the sound they carried was richer, slower. Even the echoes from the walls of the mountains seemed more deliberate, arriving a fraction later than I expected, as though considering their path. The science of sound in air is simple enough. Speed depends on temperature, density, and humidity. But when you experience it here, Not as numbers but as texture, it feels far from simple. It feels alive, as though the air is choosing what to say, and when, the deeper we went, the more I realized the quiet world was not empty at all. It was full of small, patient sounds, the grainy slide of snow shifting on a distant slope, the faint tick of ice melting drop by drop into a hidden stream, the almost imperceptible brush of crystals forming anew on a cold rock face, all of them sounds you could only hear because the larger noises had stepped aside. The science of slowing down that I in the lab, we often measure time by the clock. Out here, time feels different, stretched in some places, compressed in others. The descent had taken hours, but it did not feel like hours. It felt like one long exhale. There is a reason for this in the body. When we move from high altitude to lower, our breathing shifts. The shallow, quick breaths of thin air give way to slower, deeper ones. The parasympathetic nervous system, the branch of ourselves that governs rest, digestion, and repair, begins to take over. The heart eases. Back from its quickened rhythm, the muscles release their quiet tension. In a way, descent is not just movement through space, it is a journey into a different state of being. Perhaps that is why so many ancient stories speak of descents, not only into valleys or underworlds, but into sleep, into dreams, into the quiet chambers of the mind. Every descent is both outward and inward, pockets of warmth. It was easy to imagine the world below as uniform, cold, still, and dark. But that is never true. The Earth's surface is a mosaic, and even in the depth of shadow, some pieces are warm. We drifted over one such place, a small valley cradling a lake that still gave off faint steam. It was not volcanic heat, but the lingering memory of sunlight, stored in its waters, refusing to release itself all at once. Around its edges, frost gave way to damp moss, and the smell of earth rose faintly in the air. These are the thermal anomalies that meteorologists speak of, small zones the balance tips, where temperature breaks the local rules. They can shape entire microclimates, allowing certain plants or animals to survive where others cannot. Here, I imagine tiny insects still moving under the moss, fish sleeping in the slow warmth of the lake center, birds nesting close to, where the air stayed just a degree above freezing even in the quiet world. Life seeks the margins, the cracks where comfort lingers, the slow spiral. Our path was not straight. Few descents ever are. The air itself seemed to guide us, nudging us along slow arcs that brought new perspectives with every turn. One moment, we faced the black wall of a cliff. The next we were looking down a vast corridor carved by an ancient glacier, its floor glinting faintly under the starlight. It struck me that nature rarely moves in straight lines. Rivers bend, winds curl, roots twist. Even the path of a falling leaf spirals, tugged and turned by invisible fingers. Science explains it in terms of forces: gravity pulling down, air resistance pushing up, currents sweeping sideways, but living it here, it felt more like conversation than calculation. The leaf, the wind, the slope, they were speaking to each other, finding a path they could all agree on. Perhaps that is what descent truly is, not a surrender to gravity, but a slow negotiation between all the things that wish to pull you in different directions. The floor of the quiet world. When we finally reached the floor of the valley, the air felt almost heavy in my chest, not oppressive, but present, as if each breath was an object I could hold. Sound was close now, almost intimate. When a pebble slipped down the far slope, I could hear not just the clatter of stone, but the faint hiss of grit sliding after it. When I moved my hand through the air, I could almost hear the whisper of molecules parting and rejoining. The ground was a frozen meadow, the grass preserved in brittle stillness. Here and there, small mounds broke the surface, burrows, perhaps, though no creature emerged to investigate us. The snow was not deep, only a thin skin over the earth, and through it the shapes of stones showed like bones under pale skin. It was tempting to think of this place as lifeless. But if you crouched low, pressed your palm to the ground, You could feel the faintest heat from within. Bacteria in the soil, roots clinging to their slow metabolism, perhaps even a rodent tunneling somewhere in the dark, all working quietly, invisibly, as the surface slept. Why the quiet matters. In our modern world, quiet is rare. We measure noise in decibels, concerned mostly with the upper limits that might damage hearing. But there is another measure, one not about volume, but about presence. How much of the space around you is filled by something other than your own breath? Here, in the quiet world, that measure approaches zero. And in that absence, the smallest, presences take on new weight. The snap of ice on a branch is not just a sound, it is an event. The ripple of wind against your ear is not background, it is a messenger. Studies have shown that quiet environments alter our brain activity, slowing certain neural oscillations, allowing restorative processes to take place. Some researchers even argue that silence may help the brain regenerate neurons, a theory still under exploration but already deeply resonant with those who have felt the calm of true stillness. Descending into the quiet world is, in that sense, like descending into the mind's own repair chamber. We lingered there for a long time. Not because there was anything to do, but because being there felt like enough. The quiet was not asking for action, it was asking for presence, and perhaps that is the true lesson of descent. You do not always need to climb, to seek the thin air of summits and the brilliance of open skies. Sometimes the work is to go down, to settle, to listen to the ground speak in its slow language. When we finally rose again, leaving the valley floor behind, I felt as though I was carrying a piece of it with me, not in my hands, not even in memory, but in the pacing of my own thoughts, which now moved at the deliberate speed of falling snow. The quiet world does not end when you leave it. It lingers, the way cold lingers in stone after sunset, waiting for you to return. Chapter 5. Resting in the winter stillness. The season had shifted fully now. The world lay in the deep heart of winter, not the arrival of cold's first messenger, not the mid-season battles between snow and thaw, but the settled rain of the quiet months. The landscape outside seemed wrapped in an unshakable stillness, a kind of vast and solemn hush, as though the earth had exhaled one long, slow breath and chosen not to draw the next for some time. It was in this stillness that life itself seemed to sleep. Trees, stripped to their bare designs, stood like charcoal sketches against a pale sky. Each branch bore its own sculpture of frost, intricate patterns that caught the weak light of the low sun. The rivers had ceased their song. Beneath their frozen lids, water moved in muted secrecy. And the air itself, the air had become something different, something denser, something slower. Every sound, the distant caw of a crow, the soft crunch of boots on snow, seemed swallowed as soon as it was born. In such a world, movement became a deliberate thing. You did not rush in winter's core. The cold was not the kind you braced against for a moment before carrying on with your pace. It was a cold that rearranged your priorities, coaxing you to slow down, to consider every step, to conserve. Beneath the frozen surface, life was still present, but hidden. The forest floor, though locked under inches of frost and snow, held. Seeds curled in the dark, waiting with the patience only nature understands. Small mammals had retreated into burrows, hearts beating at a slowed rhythm that matched the season. Even the bears, great and lumbering in warmer months, had vanished from sight, lying in dens with breath so slow that it might be mistaken for stone. Science calls it torpor, hibernation, diapause, different words for the same instinct, the art of waiting. In these months, energy is currency, and the wise spend almost nothing. Nature does not fight the stillness of winter, it wears it like a cloak. The physics of cold's patience in the deep winter, the planet's tilt ensures that the sunlight arrives at shallow angles, spreading its warmth thin across the land. The air becomes a poor keeper of heat, and long nights draw out the cold's dominion. Water molecules, slowed by the lack of warmth, align into crystals, a transformation that begins invisibly and then blooms into visible frost. Each ice crystal is like a journal entry of the season, recording the humidity, the temperature, and even the silent story of the wind on the night it was formed. Your breath, when exhaled into this air, becomes visible, a cloud of vapor made of millions of tiny droplets, each one a momentary sculpture of heat leaving your body. It's the body's quiet defiance against the season, a reminder that within, the fire still burns, but even our own bodies, warm, stubborn, alive, are touched by the stillness. In the cold, blood is drawn inward, away from the skin, to keep the core heated. The heart works a fraction harder in these days. Muscles tighten to hold onto their warmth, and the mind, too, sometimes moves more slowly, as though it is in step with the long nights and short days. Winter slows us, and in that slowness, a strange clarity sometimes emerges. The psychological winter. There is a reason poets and philosophers have often compared emotional states to seasons. Winter, especially deep winter, is the season of pause, a natural lull in the noise of life. Without the lush distractions of summer or the busy transitions of autumn, the mind turns inward. For some, this stillness feels like peace. For others, it can feel like an emptiness too large to name. But both are truths of the same season. The same way a frozen lake hides the current beneath, the mind in winter hides its own quiet streams of thought, moving slowly, unseen neuroscience. Even notes the seasonal influence on mood. The low sunlight alters melatonin and serotonin rhythms, changing our sleep patterns, our energy, and sometimes even our sense of self. It is as though the mind itself hibernates, conserving its brightness for the months when light will return. Yet within that dimness is a subtle invitation to listen to things we can only hear when the noise of life is thinned out. The creak of an old floorboard at midnight. The deep hum of wind against the window. The sound of our own breathing, steady, present. The art of resting with the earth. There is an ancient wisdom in syncing oneself to the pace of the world outside. Before electric light, winter was a season of candles and firelight, of early nights and long sleeps. People ate heartier meals, told stories by the hearth, mended clothes, repaired tools, tending to the slow tasks that could be done indoors. Winter was a time of preparation, but also of acceptance. You did not demand the pace of spring from a season that had no such gifts to give. Even animals understand this rhythm. Arctic foxes curl into tight balls, their tails covering their noses, conserving every fraction of heat. Tiny voles tunnel under the snow, where the Earth's residual warmth lingers just enough to make survival possible. Every creature adopts some ritual of energy-saving stillness. For us, winter stillness is not just about enduring, it can be a teacher. It reminds us that life is not sustained by constant motion alone. That pausing is not the same as wasting time. That dormancy can be fertile. The winter night as a mirror.t night, the stillness grows so deep it feels almost like an element of its own, as though silence has frozen into the air. The stars burn more sharply in the crisp sky, their light unsoftened by humidity or haze. You can stand outside, breath clouding before you, and hear the subtle sounds of the cold itself, the soft shifting of snow as it settles, the distant crack of ice forming on a pond, the faint whine of wind finding its way between branches. In those moments, time seems to stretch. The minutes feel long enough to hold thoughts you had forgotten you carried. You might remember someone's voice. You might imagine a place you've never been. You might simply stand, feeling the small warmth of your body in a world of vast cold, and recognize the miracle of being here at all. Winter stillness has a way of magnifying what matters. In the absence of distraction, the truth of our attachments, our longings, our gratitude comes into sharper focus. The science of renewal in rest. Even in science, stillness has its purpose. In the botanical world, winter's dormancy protects seeds from sprouting too soon. If warmth came briefly in January, a plant that germinated then would be destroyed by February's inevitable freeze. So dormancy is a shield, a pause that ensures survival until conditions are truly right. The same principle applies in our own lives, though less visibly. Our bodies repair themselves and rest, cells regenerate, the immune system strengthens, the mind processes and stores memories. Winter, in its vast pause, is like a seasonal form of sleep for the world itself, and when the thaw comes, it is precisely because of this long, deep rest that the burst of spring is so powerful. The green comes quickly, almost explosively, as though the earth had been holding its breath and finally lets it out. If you sit in the heart of winter, truly sit, without rushing, without planning for the next season, you may notice a strange thing. The stillness stops feeling like emptiness and begins to feel like fullness. The snow is not blank. It is a page waiting for the ink of footsteps. The bare trees are not dead. They are outlines waiting for color. The silence is not absence. It is the frame around a painting, giving shape to what it holds, and in that recognition, you feel the rare peace of being aligned with the earth's own heartbeat. Slow, quiet, patient. Winter is not asking you to endure it. It is inviting you to rest with it, to match its pace, to understand that some seasons are meant for holding still, for breathing deeply, for conserving the quiet fire within. When the thaw comes, it will come. But for now, we rest in the winter. Stillness. And so, the long journey through frost and breath, through clouds and silence, through the descent into the quiet world, finds its resting place here. Not in some grand revelation, nor in a blaze of answers, but in a stillness that asks nothing of you at all. The winter air holds you as though it has always known you. Every flake of snow that drifts from the grey sky seems to carry an old memory, one that belonged to the earth before you were born. It is not here to be solved. It is only here to be felt. You have followed the arc of the season story, from the first breath of ice, to the hidden geometry of clouds, to the long descent where sound thinned and time softened. And now, the world has gone so quiet that even the wind seems reluctant to speak. Here, the body remembers what the mind forgets, that we are not machines moving from task to task, but tides, shifting between fullness and retreat. That rest is not the absence of life. It is the slow turning of life inward, toward the root, toward the deep chambers where renewal is already happening, in ways too subtle to see that if you listen, you may notice that your breathing has matched the rhythm of the land itself, long inhales, gentle pauses, slow exhales that fall into the folds of snow like soft cloth. The stillness outside has reached into you, and now the two are almost the same thing, and maybe that was the point all along. Not to collect the facts of winter like coins, but to let its presence work on you from the inside out. To remember that the earth, in its great turning, has always trusted itself enough to stop, to wait, to let the seeds sleep until they are ready. The sky deepens into evening. Somewhere far away, a thin thread of light glows at the edge of the horizon, promising that another season waits beyond the frost. But for now, you are exactly where you need to be. Let the stillness stay with you. Let it fold itself into your thoughts like the hush of snow on pine branches. Let it remind you that nothing in nature is in a hurry, and neither are you tonight. You rest. Tomorrow will come, as it always does. But for now, stay in the winter stillness. Stay in the quiet world. And as you drift into sleep, remember, the frost, the clouds, the air, the silence, they have all been holding you, and they always will. Good night.